In today's video, we're breaking down Kaleb Johnson of Iowa. What are his strengths and weaknesses? How is he best utilized? Where do we think he goes in the NFL draft? And what might we be able to expect from him in fantasy? Watch to the end of this video and you'll have a good idea. Kaleb Johnson is listed on PFF as 6'2", 225. I think both the height and the weight are pretty accurate, and I don't think the Pro Day or Combine is going to tell us much different. He's 21 years and 4 months old right now, and he is a true junior. And while it doesn't matter per se as much with running backs that they're true juniors, we do like our prospects to be early declares for sure. In terms of his production, as a true freshman in 2022, he had 151 attempts for 777 yards on the ground, 5.1 a clip, and 6 touchdowns on the ground with 2 fumbles. Through the air, he really wasn't utilized at all. On 5 targets, he went 4 for 27 and no touchdown. And so the production was fine as a true freshman, but nothing otherworldly. As a sophomore, he did see a regression in total stats. He did miss 3 games due to injury, though, so that's also something I'll mention later as to why I think that could potentially be an issue with him. But nonetheless, he had 117 attempts, 463 yards on the ground, only 4.0 yards per carry, 3 touchdowns, and another 2 fumbles. And through the air, his production was essentially identical. On the same amount of targets being 5, he had 3 for 25 and no touchdown. As a true junior, though, boy, did he step up his production. On 240 attempts, he had 1,535 yards on the ground at 6.4 per carry, which was a career high, 21 rushing touchdowns, and no fumbles. Through the air, he also saw exponentially larger usage. On 25 targets, he had 22 receptions, 190 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns. Now, he did have 2 dropped passes, and so that is something to consider here, but overall, the production was much better this season. Looking at some advanced stats, I took a look at draft-eligible FBS running backs with 100-plus rushing attempts. That was a sample size here of 76 players. Johnson received 240 rushing attempts this season. In terms of his yards per attempt, his 6.4 was 7th in the sample size, so that's really, really good, quite efficient. In terms of his yak per attempt, his 4.42 was 4th. And so he is a very tough runner, and you'll see that with his grades here in a minute. His breakaway run percentage at 56.1% was 2nd. So he's also gaining chunk gains rather consistently. His PFF rushing grade of 86.7 was tied for 15th, so that's good as well. Now, his PFF receiving grade of 64.7 is tied for 26th. I think in the ways in which he's utilized, which is really just in the screen game and flat routes, essentially, that he is quite effective there. But I don't think that he has a lot of the max upside as a receiver that some of these other prospects are going to have. In terms of his yards per out run, is 1.23 for 16th. But like I said, it was limited usage, and he is effective after the catch, for instance, but he's just not going to be the route runner that some of these other guys are going to be. But in terms of his PFF elusiveness rating, his 131.5 score was 6th in the sample size. That is incredible. His missed tackles forced of 66 are tied for 9th. We like that. His rushing yards per game of 127.9 is great on 21.8 average rush attempts per game. His 15.8 receiving yards per game aren't incredible, but it's better than nothing on 1.8 receptions per game. And on the season, he had 23 total touchdowns. As far as the grades go for him, remember that he's give or take 6'2", 225. He's a true junior out of Iowa. My valuation of him, I think he's worthy of an early 2nd round pick. My comp for him is James Conner with less receiving prowess. So I think that Kaleb Johnson is a good fit for outside and inside zone schemes. He's physical. He invites contact just like James Conner. But he really is a somewhat limited receiver. He's very good after the catch, just like James Conner is. But they really don't have the lateral agility due to their frame to be running wild routes like Alvin Kamara, for instance. So I think that's a relatively good comp for him. My official grade for him is a 79.5 out of 100. And so that is at the very top of the good tier of running backs. But once again, that is just barely missing the great prospect mark. And I think a lot of these are somewhat subjective. So I think he's teetering on that line. But in the end, I did give him a very high, good running back grade. Now, in terms of his contact balance, he's very physical. He loves contact, but he doesn't necessarily run through people as consistently as I would like. He more so bounces off of them like a pinball. And I think that his high pad level has a lot to do with that. And I think if he were to lower it, he would power through people more consistently while not losing the direction per se. You know, he'll bounce off of somebody, but it'll set him back a second. And sure, he's still upright, but I really do wish he would power through people a little bit more consistently, but nonetheless, his contact balance is quite good, and he's generally going to stay upright with contact. In terms of his physicality, he's a straight 5 out of 5. He lives for contact. He doesn't shy away from any. He's going to be very physically dominant due to his frame at the NFL level. In terms of his vision, he's decisive in inside, mid, and outside zone concepts. Um, every now and then he'll miss a hole, but relatively good in terms of his vision. His patience also has some to do with that as well. He's quite patient, but he's not lackadaisical either. In terms of his ball security, he had 4 total fumbles in his first 2 seasons, but none in his true junior season. And so I don't think ball security is going to be an issue whatsoever. And typically prospects with less than 5 career fumbles at the collegiate level, you really just don't have anything to worry about. In terms of his run IQ, I gave him a 4.5 out of 5. He's generally not going to miss a lane. He's rather consistent, and he is very decisive when he finds the lane and powers through it. So, and he has a relatively good ability to get skinny despite his massive frame. So overall, I really like his instincts as a runner. In terms of his speed, I gave him a 6.5 out of 10. His max speed is capped for sure. He has enough to get chunk gains rather consistently, and while he did house some long runs at the collegiate level, it was because he was able to break tackles to do so, and he had good blocking downfield. It wasn't that he was really able to gain separation between trailing defenders. So I really don't think we're going to see, 70-yard touchdowns at the NFL level too often, if ever. But I do think he's going to get chunk gains rather consistently. Now, in terms of his acceleration, it's really good for his size. He gets up to his top speed really relatively quickly. And once again, his decisiveness helps him with that. But obviously, with somebody like him having a bigger frame, he just doesn't have the acceleration as somebody like Jahmyr Gibbs, which makes sense given his frame. In terms of his deceleration, agility, and change of direction, I gave him 3 out of 5s for all of these. It's not terrible for somebody with his frame, but he just doesn't have the lateral agility and wiggle to make people miss in the open field. You're not going to see him wildly change directions at all. He can bend the corner if he is given a good angle, but once again, you're just not going to see him out athleting people through agility very often. It's going to be through power. In terms of his catching, I gave him a 5 out of 5. So he did have 2 drops on a limited sample size during his entire collegiate career, but the ball placement on one of those targets wasn't ideal. So I'm not going to, really hurt his score there. But when he does catch the football, he's natural. He can look upfield, immediately become a receiver. So it's not as if he doesn't have the natural instincts necessary. In terms of his route running, I did ding him a little bit here. I gave him a 2.5 out of 5. At least during college, he really only did screens or flats. His run after catch is quite good because he becomes a running back immediately, breaks tons of tackles, but he just doesn't have the lateral agility to run Texas routes, for instance, or anything advanced, and you're certainly not going to put him in the slot. In terms of his pass protection, it's pretty good. He can get overtaken by large or very powerful rushers, and so I don't think it's going to be an issue for him because he does have a good frame and he's very willing, but it could be a little bit better. In terms of his dog factor, I gave him a straight 10 out of 10. He's like a pinball machine in the open field. He loves contact. He's aggressive. He doesn't fumble very often, and he does have the capability to be a 3-down back, but albeit a little bit limited in the passing game. But nonetheless, straight 10 out of 10 there. In terms of his analytics, he only had 1,000-yard season in his collegiate career, and he regressed in terms of total stat lines from his freshman to sophomore season. Once again, he did miss 3 games due to injury, but he probably wasn't going to have anywhere close to 1,000 yards as a sophomore. And so I gave him a 3 out of 5 for the analytics because the overall production just wasn't that good. Now, one thing, though, is Iowa doesn't really like to pass the ball to their running backs very often, so that is something I considered here. But at the same time, in terms of the analytics, if you just don't get much receiving usage, I'm not going to give you plus points when you're just not doing it. But it's not as though he's incapable. And like I said, after the catch, he is very good and breaks tackles with the best of them. In terms of his projected draft capital, I gave him a 4 out of 5. I think he's going to be an early 2nd-round pick. At the worst, he could potentially slip into the 3rd round if his combine is worse than I think it's going to be. But I think he's going to have the requisite athleticism to be worthy of a 2nd-round pick, and I think he does get the capital there. My potential worries or limitations, he doesn't have the long speed to house longer runs consistently at the NFL level, in my opinion. Now, if he's able to break multiple tackles and gets good blocking, he could get a long touchdown or two. But I think he's going to be more like Najee Harris in a sense where, he'll get those 30-yard runs rather consistently due to power and good vision. But once again, the long speed due to his frame just isn't that great. And then he also runs with a high pad level and he has a limited route tree. With the high pad level, does he fix that? Can coaching really help him out there? That would help his contact balance, in my opinion, and he would be able to run through people rather than kind of bounce off of them a little bit better. But who knows if that gets fixed? And as far as his limited route tree, I really don't think there's that much room for it to grow because he doesn't have the lateral agility rather to be an elite route runner, in my opinion. Once again, I don't think it's as if he's not going to be able to be a 3-down back. And so, since I think he's going to be an early second round pick, I took a look at 2020 through 2024, specifically running backs selected in the second round. It's a decent sample size. DeAndre Swift was picked 35th overall in 2020. In 5 NFL seasons, he's had 0 RB1 seasons, but 5 RB2 seasons. And so that's a 0% RB1 hit rate, but a 100% RB2 hit rate. If you drafted him in, the mid-late first round, in terms of your fantasy drafts, I don't think you'd be too disappointed with that. But another thing is he's a vastly different player from Swift, so they themselves are not that comparable. Jonathan Taylor picked 41st overall in the same draft. I think he should have been picked first. But in 5 seasons, he's had 3 RB1 seasons and 0 RB2 seasons. And so that's a 60% RB1 hit rate and a 0% RB2 hit rate. And the 3 seasons he's been able to stay healthy, he's been an RB1. And the 2 in which he missed quite a few games, he didn't even make the RB2 mark. And you'd be obviously happy if he was able to produce like JT. Cam Akers picked 52nd overall in 2020. In 5 seasons, he's had 0 RB1 or RB2 seasons. He dealt with injuries, and so that really sapped a lot of his explosiveness. Obviously, you hope his career doesn't end up like that, but they're not comparable players either, really. J.K. Dobbins, was picked 55th overall in the same draft. In 5 seasons, he's had 0 RB1 seasons and 2 RB2 seasons. So that's a 0% RB1 hit rate and a 40% RB2 hit rate. Just like with Cam Akers, he's dealt with injuries. He's a really talented back, but unfortunately, the production just hasn't been there due to injury. A.J. Dillon was picked 62nd overall. So in 5 seasons, he's had 0 RB1 seasons and 1 RB2 season. That's a 0% RB1 hit rate and a 20% RB2 hit rate. You definitely hope that his career is going to be better than A.J. Dillon's. I think he's a vastly more talented player, though. I was never the biggest A.J. Dillon guy. As far as 2021, Javonte Williams was picked 35th overall. In 4 seasons, he's had 0 RB1 seasons and 1 RB2 season. And so that's a 0% RB1 hit rate and a 25% RB2 hit rate. You do hope that his career ends up better than Williams, but Williams, just like with some of these other guys, has dealt with injury, and so it's unfortunate for him. I think he would have been quite good for us, especially in fantasy. Breece Hall picked 36th overall. In 3 seasons, he's had 1 RB1 season, 1 RB2 season, and so that's a 33% RB1 hit rate and a 33% RB2 hit rate. He did miss a substantial amount of his rookie season with an ACL tear. If you see similar production out of him as Breece Hall has given us, I think he'd be pretty happy. Kenneth Walker picked 41st overall in 2022. In 3 seasons, hasn't been an RB1, but has had 2 RB2 seasons. And so that's a 0% RB1 hit rate and a 66% RB2 hit rate. I think if you saw that out of Kaleb Johnson, you'd be fine with that too. Kenneth Walker's a very good player, but he's also dealt with some nagging injuries. James Cook picked 63rd overall in 2022. In 3 seasons, has had 2 RB1 seasons and 0 RB2 seasons. And so that's a 66% RB1 hit rate and a 0% RB2 hit rate. He really didn't get any usage as a rookie, but the past 2 seasons, he's been great for us in fantasy. This season, he scored a ton of touchdowns in a high-powered Bills offense. I think you'd obviously be really happy if you got that kind of production out of him. And then Zach Charbonnet was picked 52nd overall in 2023. So in 2 seasons, he's neither been an RB1 nor an RB2, and so that's a 0% hit rate across both. But it is important to remember that he was drafted on the same team as Kenneth Walker, and Kenneth Walker is the starter when both of them are active. But with Charbonnet, when Walker does miss time, which happens pretty much every year, he is really, really effective and has a ton of upside. And so his circumstances his circumstance rather is a little bit different than some of these other guys. And I think that if he had been drafted into a better situation in terms of playing time, I think he would have been quite good for us consistently in fantasy. Now, where does Kaleb Johnson rank among his contemporaries in 2025, at least the ones in which I've graded so far, as well as the 2024 class? Well, I have him as the RB3. I haven't graded an elite RB prospect yet, but I have Genty as a great prospect and relatively separated from Hampton, who's also, in my opinion, a great prospect, at least according to the model in which I use. And I have Johnson at the top of the good tier, but he's teetering right on the edge. And so if you, for instance, were to have Johnson ahead of Hampton, I really wouldn't argue with you too much. Now, if you had either one of these guys over Genty, I would have an issue with that personally. But Johnson is a good prospect, potentially a great prospect. I give Hampton the edge because I think he has more receiving upside and he had better analytics coming out. And so I think that's mostly what's given him the edge. But between the two players, they're relatively similar. I just think that Hampton, once again, has a little bit better receiving upside at the NFL level. But as far as Johnson compared to anyone in 2024, I think he's distinctly better, even though technically he grades in the same tier as Benson, Brooks, and Wright. But as you can see, there's a vast difference between the two of them in their final scores. And so remember that he's give or take 6 foot 225. That is the frame necessary. That's going to be over a 30.0 BMI to be a workhorse in the NFL. He's a true junior, so we like that. He's going to be 21 years old for some of his rookie season. My evaluation, I think he's worthy of an early second-round pick. My comp is James Conner with less receiving prowess. They're both very physical, good scheme fits for inside and outside zone, decisive runners, physical, but they lack the long speed to house runs consistently, but they will get chunk gains consistently because of their physicality and ability to break tackles. Their contact balance are both great. And his official grade was a 79.5 out of 100, which is at the very top of a good running back prospect, but once again, is teetering on the edge of being a great prospect. And I want to give a special shout out to my Patreon members. Thank you to Big Hunt, SP, Mage Jack, and Infamy MTG. If you would like to become a member, I'm going to leave a link in the comment section. As far as what you'll gain, you'll get access to a private Discord server. I'm going to have a real life and fantasy football chat where we talk about real life NFL news. Any questions you might have will be answered in the real life NFL chat. And as far as the fantasy football chat, we'll talk about what's happening in the fantasy world. I'll give you team reviews, give you optimal roster construction based on your specific league settings, trades you can make to strengthen your roster, buying and selling points, specifically price points for various players based on your positions of need. I'll give you a special shout out, obviously, on all of these videos. You'll get early access to videos. You'll be part of private live streams that are not available to regular YouTube members. And you will also have the ability to suggest videos specifically for you on Patreon. I've already made one on Isaac Rendo as per request by one of my Patreon members. And so once again, if you would like to join, the link is going to be in the comment section. Thanks.